Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and in popular culture. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another show. My name is Bruce Markison, and as always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing really great, Bruce. I got to enjoy the wonderful partial solar eclipse this morning, and it was absolutely spectacular here in Nova Scotia. It was 75% coverage, and it was very stunning. So, great way to start a Saturday. How's everything been going with you?
Good. I was not aware of this solar eclipse, so that was a bit of news to me. Also, a bit of news that came down earlier in the week, and this was really good news. Glad to hear about this. Our friend Richie Coster, his new TV show Watson, which airs Sunday nights on the CBS network, has been renewed for a second season. We had Richie on the program a few months back to preview Watson. 7 episodes have aired so far for season number 1. There are still 6 to go. And the great thing is there will be a season 2, so I imagine Richie will be heading out. I think it's to the Vancouver area to film that second season. So really excited for him. Glad to hear it, and I know you feel good about it as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's so exciting for Richie, and I can't wait to start catching the show. And I'll make sure that we link his interview just at the bottom of the description of this podcast. So if people want to go back and check it out and listen to some Watson, we would be happy for you guys to have a listen and to learn for yourself all about the great show. So, yeah.
For those who haven't seen the show, it's a play, a modern play, if you will, on the Sherlock Holmes story, but it comes after Sherlock's death. And the main character is the doctor, John Watson, Sherlock's assistant, played very well by Morris Chestnut. Richie plays the character of Shinwell Johnson, who's featured in one of the original Sherlock Holmes books by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And Richie is kind of the aide to Watson. He's like the trusted advisor, although he's not always openly honest with Dr. Watson about what's going on. Richie does a great job. So does Morris Chestnut in the lead role. And a character I really like is one of the young doctors that work at this hospital, this top-notch clinic. And it's basically been bequeathed to them by Sherlock Holmes. He's left them the money specifically for Watson to open this clinic, and he does so in Pittsburgh, PA. And one of the young doctors is played by an American actress named Inga Schlingmann. She plays Dr. Lubbock, and I think she's a really intriguing character as well. So there's lots of interesting characters. It's part medical drama, part mystery, in addition to usually a featured patient who has an unusual disease that's hard to diagnose. There's also some side stuff going on with Moriarty. Of course, he was a big character in the Sherlock Holmes books. I really like it. I think it's well done. It's well acted. It's creative, and just feel really good for Richie that there is going to be a season 2. So very nice to hear that news.
Nice.
All right. Our guest this week is, frankly, one of the best authors and historians on the subject of horror, especially when it comes to classic horror history. His name is Gregory Mank. Greg has written numerous books, including one of my favorites, Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, the expanded story of a haunting collaboration about all the films they made together. He's also written It's Alive, the classic cinema saga of Frankenstein, and Angels and Ministers of Grace Defend Us, more dark alleys of classic horror cinema. Those are just a few of the many books he has written. Greg has done bios of Colin Clive and Laird Cregar, 2 very talented but ill-fated actors. Fascinating stuff there. Greg has won 4 Rondo Awards for his writing about horror, and this year has been nominated several categories. Glad to hear for this year's Rondo Awards. And the categories that Greg's been nominated in this year include Best Book of the Year Nonfiction, for a book that he wrote called Scripts From The Crypt, The Ghost of Frankenstein, co-authored with another great historian, Tom Weaver. Also, Greg nominated for Best Event of the Year for his presentation on House of Frankenstein. That co-hosted by another good friend of ours, Frank Dello Stritto, terrific writer. That presentation was delivered at the Monster Bash convention. I didn't have a chance to go, but I heard it was a wonderful talk. Greg and Frank usually steal the show at Monster Bash. And this episode, this will be the second time we've had Greg on the program. We're going to be talking with him about both the Ghost of Frankenstein and House of Frankenstein. Those will be our main topics of conversation. Greg, welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery. It's great to have you on the show again. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's very good to be here. And by the way, I'm also a big fan of Watson. We've been watching it here.
Oh, good.
Oh yeah, it's a remarkable show, and it is so smart. I guess is the word to use. It's just the dialogue, the actors, everything. Everybody on the show is so incredibly smart.
Yeah,
it's it's really really cool to see them in action, and it really is. I'm very very much looking forward to the future with the program.
Yeah, Richie plays a character who's, I think, the only non-doctor of the main characters, but he's, still highly intelligent. And he, of course, knows Watson better than anyone. He's been with him for years. Richie's a fantastic character actor, but this is really the first TV show, at least that I remember, where he's been a regular and not just maybe a recurring character. So he's a big part of it. It took him a while. It took CBS a while to renew the deal. There was some concern that they were going to cancel because they hadn't committed, but the ratings were good. It helps that they have a terrific lead-in Tracker, which I think is about the highest rated show out there. So Sunday nights, big hit with Tracker and Watson. Good stuff.
Definitely.
So Greg, we're going to talk with you about two of the films that were a big part of your contributions last year, one in book form and the other presentation at the Monster Bash convention. We'll start with Ghost of Frankenstein. This is the fourth in Universal's series of Frankenstein films. They did 8 in total. This film debuted in theaters 1942. The director, Earl C. Kenton, revives the monster through a series of explosions at the castle where he is entombed. He is then struck by lightning, giving him a further jolt of energy. Bela Lugosi's Igor, memorable character, somehow is alive after seemingly being shot at the end of Son of Frankenstein. The monster and Lugosi's character end up going to Ludwig Frankenstein, who is the son of Wolf von Frankenstein. Igor wants Ludwig to provide further care for the creature, who is in a bit of a weakened condition. Ludwig believes the monster must receive a new brain in order to live long term, and he becomes consumed with this idea of replacing his current brain, which is criminal in nature, with one that comes from someone who has a sense of morality, something Igor does not have. But Ludwig unwittingly ends up transplanting the brain of the evil Igor, and of course that leads to all sorts of problems. So this is the storyline presented in the film, Ghost of Frankenstein. But in your book, you and Tom Weaver reveal that a much different script, really completely different, was proposed. Tell us about that, Greg.
Yes, it was. It really was. It was very much linked to Son of Frankenstein, more so, of course, than the Ghost of Frankenstein ended up being. And actually, what happened was that Wolf Frankenstein, who was played by Basil Rathbone in Son of Frankenstein, is the major character. There's no Ludwig. All right. Wolf continues in his pursuits, moves to a sanitarium in another town. He was going to start a new life. All right. It's a very grim story in a number of ways. First of all, his wife, who was played in Son of Frankenstein by lovely Josephine Hutchinson, at some point in the story commits suicide, which is certainly, it's not even supposedly allowable by the production code in those days, but that's the way it was written, because she can't take all of the terrible, grim, horrible things that are happening. And also something in it that is really cool is that there is another monster character. He's not a monster in the fact that he's been put together, but he's a monster certainly in his mind and his behavior. And that's a character named Theodore. And Theodore is this incredible misfit who wants to gather together all the misfits of the town, particularly people who are have some kind of deformity or some kind of mental anguish or something of this nature, form an army of these people and have them take over, all right, the village. So it's sort of like a combination of a bunch of different horror films. There's even a little bit of like Freaks, all right, in there with the way it comes together. So as it turned out, Theodore never made the new movie. They took out Wolf and they put in Ludwig. And Ludwig was another character. Ludwig actually was the brother of Wolf. He was, or he's called the second son of Frankenstein. So if you look at the family tree, you would have Colin Clive as Frankenstein, and then you would have, as it went from there, you would have Wolf, all right, as his first son, and you would have Ludwig as his second son. All right, so Wolf is going. We don't see hide nor hair of Wolf. But we do see a lot of this character of Ludwig, who's played by the incredibly distinguished Sir Cedric Hardwicke, which is something else to mention about the film as we know it, and that is, as we've seen it, the actual version, and that is that Universal, even though this is a big change, they really went for class in this movie. They have a classy cast. They have a lot of wonderful special effects. They have terrific music. It's a wonderful addition to the franchise, the Frankenstein franchise that was in play at Universal. So that whole thing with Wolf still being alive, and the monster kills him at the end, with this character of Theodore. Theodore does put Igor's brain into the monster. It is a little bit of it's all kinds of macabre stuff flying, fast and thick throughout the story, and it's never really become absolutely clear why they decided to change it, other than the fact that it might have been overkill, literally and figuratively. With the story, that it just was too much crazy stuff going on, and so therefore they went to a more subtle, if you want to call it the finish from that progression of with the characters, and so there it was. So this was not unusual. It's very, very strange that in many of these films that there were early scripts that were eventually tossed out, and that they figured weren't going to work, and they would put things in that they thought were a great idea at the time, and then the more they thought about it, the more they said, "Nah, it's really not a great idea." For example, in Bride of Frankenstein, there's a scene in which the monster follows a procession of nuns into a convent. It's basically to tear them apart so we can get body parts for the bride, for the mate. All right. And, so at the time they sounded like, hey, the audience is really going to get into that. And then he thought, no, they won't get into that. They're going to say, what am I watching? All right. Wow. So that was cut. So this happened throughout the film. Son of Frankenstein, the monster talks and a lot. And there's no Igor at all in the original Son of Frankenstein. So the writers kept busy at the studio. Yeah. Trying this out, trying that out, trying this, and then eventually saying, okay, we'll go this way, finally putting the lid on it and saying, okay, this is,
Yeah. I love the description at the Amazon.com entry for the book that you and Tom Weaver did. And this was for the script that never happened. Human monsters, cripples, and wretches unite. Igor, every monster kid's favorite blacksmith body snatcher, adds paramilitary strategist to his bulging resume when he unveils his plan to organize his country's outcasts into a fighting force. So this was all part of it. A little bit too wild. Do we know, Greg, who rejected the script? Who said we can't do this?
I think the studio, just basically, and I think that what happened was that again they ran it through. They had a producer there, a very dynamic producer named George Wagner, who was actually a good writer himself, and had very different tastes in what they would do, what they wouldn't do. And he would look at these things and he would say, "Yeah, I like that. No, I don't like this," and that's kind of stuff. And so I think it was mainly the studio. I don't think the censors were really ever really got that far. The new draft that they would look at it and say, to the point that they would actually reject the story at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is a great description on the book. By the way, I have to give Tom Weaver credit for that. That was his
You wrote that.
prose. He just wrote
Very nice. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, Boris Karloff played the monster in the first 3 films, Frankenstein, Bride, and Son of Frankenstein. Let's talk about why he did not return for Ghost of Frankenstein. I've heard 2 different theories, and perhaps you can settle this. Was it because he felt the role had simply run its course? Or was it, as some have said, because of a conflict with his schedule? I think he was doing Arsenic and Old Lace. Which of the 2 reasons is the correct one?
Actually, it's both. He was unhappy with Son of Frankenstein. He felt that the monster didn't have enough to do. And I think what was happening in Son of Frankenstein was the director and producer, Roland V. Lee, figured, we're going to use the monster very sparingly here, but whatever he does, it'll really count. We'll put him in here, we'll put him in there, we'll put him in there, and then work him up to the climax where he, goes wild and falls into the sulfur pit and all these kind of things. But we won't push him too far. Because he figured that, the monster had done so much crazy stuff in Bride of Frankenstein that, don't push it too far. And that when he smoked cigars and hiccuped and cried, of course, all this kind of stuff. And we don't want to try to top that. So they figured, we'll go a different route. But with Karloff, he felt, yeah, I agree. I think the monster, I don't want to disrespect the character by, pushing it too long. But it's perfectly true what else you said about the fact that at the time that they made The Ghost of Frankenstein, he was on Broadway in the play Arsenic and Old Lace. And that needs some development in mentioning that, because of the fact that play was one of the great historic hits of the American theater. I mean, it was just absolutely sensational smash hit. And the thing everybody remembered from it was the fact that Karloff, played a mad killer who looked like Boris Karloff. All right, that was the joke. And
right.
Yeah. And he came in, and at one point his assistant says to him, "Why did you kill that man?" And Karloff says, "I shot him because he said I look like Boris Karloff." So, of course, it was Boris Karloff saying the lines, so the audience just roared. They thought this was great.
Yeah.
And they thought, well, but isn't that funny? Plus, isn't he a good sport to be doing this and so on? So he was making a pile of money. I mean, he was one of the original investors in the play. He was getting a weekly salary. He was, it was great. And he loved being on the stage again. And so this play was running. It could look like it was going to run forever. And he figured, I don't want to leave Arsenic and Old Lace to go out and play the monster when they might make a real muck of it again. They might decide that they're going to do this and that, and they'll make a fool of him, and they'll make a clown of him, and they'll do all these things. So no, thank you. I'm going to stay with Arsenic and Old Lace, and you'll have to find another monster. And he stuck to it. Even though the monster came back in other films, of course, as we know, Karloff didn't come back at this point. He didn't. And in Ghost of Frankenstein, they did. They had to find another monster.
So with Karloff out of the equation, Universal's got to find somebody. They end up picking Lon Chaney Jr. And I guess in retrospect, that made a lot of sense. He's coming off the recent success in The Wolfman. Some people thought he was kind of the successor to Karloff as Universal's number one character, monster, number one actor to play monsters in the future. Talk a little bit about the selection of Chaney. Was it an obvious choice, or was there some debate in the studio about that?
Well, it's very interesting, Bruce, how it came together, because Universal would put programs together, basically, and programs for actors together. All right, a series for an actor. All right, they would say, okay, we're going to take this actor and we're going to build him up or her up in this particular kind of role. It's interesting that Chaney did The Wolfman, which he finished like in November of 1941, and before Christmas, so like in the middle of December of 1941, Chaney was already doing The Ghost of Frankenstein. So he really hadn't had time yet to really
Mm.
show that he was, what he could do, that he was a real hit as the Wolfman. The film hadn't even been really released. It hadn't opened in New York, hadn't opened in Hollywood. So what the gamble that Universal was taking was that, okay, we'll put him in this horror role, we'll put him in that horror role, we'll put him in this one, we'll put him in that one, and we'll create our sort of one man horror star here. Why not? I mean, the guy's young, right? He's in his early mid 30s. He's big, he's brawny, and of course his name is Chaney. All right, and so he's the son of the man of 1,000 faces. So there's all these marketing possibilities, strategies they can put together here with him, and so they actually did. It actually, with Ghost of Frankenstein, it actually was all percolating and shooting, and nobody in a theater had even seen the Wolfman yet. They were just,
Really?
Wow. They had, and it opened maybe I think about 5 days later in New York. At that point, Chaney was working in Ghost of Frankenstein. So yeah, it was quite a situation, a marketing ploy with Universal. He'll be the master character creator. We'll put him in this one and that one, and the audience is going to love him because they're going to say, "Wow, what an actor! He can play all these characters." How well he could play them is open to debate. Some people think that he was terrific, and Ghost of Frankenstein is a perfect example. There are people who think that he was really, really did a fine job as the monster in Ghost of Frankenstein. Other people think that he was, probably the worst of the actors who appeared in those 8 films. Very controversial actor always, and particularly in that movie.
What do you think, Greg, of his performance? Do you think he did the job well, or a little bit subpar?
Well, it depends on what your preference would be. It's interesting that, again, it's not fair to be comparing him to Karloff, because Karloff had done it, 3 times. But Karloff was in the 3 films he did. It was such an emotional performance. It was such a passionate performance. All these remarkable, miraculous things he was able to get into the character. Part of it, being because Karloff was an absolutely terrific actor. Part of it because James Whale, who directed him in the first 2 films, went for that. In the case of Chaney, first of all, I think that the director, Earl C. Kenton, decided, let's tone down the monster. Let's not tax him too much. Let's just make him a presence, make him this big, looming, legendary monster. All right, as a presence. But it gets a little overdone, because it's interesting when you watch the film. Chaney as the monster never makes a sound. I mean, he doesn't cry. He doesn't like Karloff cried. He doesn't shout. He doesn't scream. He certainly doesn't speak in it until the end, when he gets the new brain from Igor, and then he's, of course, speaking in Lugosi's voice, with the dubbing going on. But I think that he has a powerful presence in the role. But I think that he's handicapped by, if you have seen Karloff do it, it's kind of like, well, come on, Lon, let's get going here, right? Let's start cranking this up, and let's start giving this a performance, because these other actors in the film, are dancing rings around you while you're just kind of lumbering around, and so it's not really fair. It's hard to say definitively. Again, though, whether that was Chaney's choice, the director's choice, or the choice of both of them, as to what it would be. But it is a little startling to watch the film and to see him as mute, both mute from the point of view of not speaking, from the point of the emotional of the acting. It's a very, very stolid monster, and scary, yes, big, formidable, all these things, but from the point of view of personality, it's just not there.
Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment. Now, the makeup that was used made Chaney look facially very similar to Karloff, but then you talk about their physiques, totally different. Chaney is like 6'2", 230 pounds. And
Right.
then you add up the costuming, the boots and everything else, and he's carrying like 280 pounds of weight.
That's
So you
right.
can see physically, this is a much more intimidating brute of a monster. Much
It
different.
is. It is. And so he is. And that adds to the fact that he really is scary. I mean, when he walks on and then they play the theme music for him and all this sort of thing. He really is. I mean, it's like, wow, look look at his bruiser coming in here. In the case of Karloff, of course, in Bride of Frankenstein, you could almost argue with that. Karloff is at some of the time of it seems to be playing it for laughs. At least not for laughs, but for kind of a crazy amok humanity, that takes him in all kinds of crazy directions. And in the first film, he's very pitiful and he's and this sort of thing. He's going for that. Third film, again, he's toned down, but he still has some very, very dramatic, very almost hysterical moments. But you're right that from the point of view of actually having a big, strapping actor, there he is. And of course, something that many of the audiences would have remembered when they saw the film, they hadn't seen the Wolfman yet. Well, at least early on, they hadn't seen the Wolfman while the film was being shot, but they had seen Of Mice and Men. And that film, of course, was really very incredibly powerful film, and a brilliant performance by Chaney. And in that, he's of course, he's established his character of Lenny is established as being this incredibly strong and intimidating man. He's the sweetest man who ever lived, as Chaney put it about the character. But at the same time, he's like a death machine. Everywhere he goes, everything he touches, dies. A puppy dies. Betty Field in the movie dies. He's like, you just can't let him loose, which is why the ending is the way it is with Burgess Meredith shooting him in the back of the head. It's like, we just can't let you run wild anymore, Lenny. This not good for you. It's certainly not good for the people you come across. So a lot of people have seen that movie. So when Chaney came in and they recognized him as the monster, they right away thought, uh-oh, here he comes. This is, it's like Lenny. And I think that for a lot of people who saw the film, that's the way they kind of thought of him. They thought, this is almost like Lenny back from the grave, in this case. Of course, Lenny spoke, but which the monster doesn't. But
right.
you can kind of put that aside as a, this is something that unfortunately happened during when he died, and then when he came back to life, he had lost power of speech, kind of thing. But he always was. Chaney always was a very strong actor, and with a great sense of tragedy about him. He certainly had it in Men. He certainly has it in The Wolfman. He doesn't have it quite as much in The Ghost of Frankenstein because of the character he's playing. It's a different kind of character, and plus, of course, by the end of the movie, he's not the monster anymore. He's Igor, and the monster's. And so the movie kind of goes fluey. In the last 5 minutes with the brain transplant and Igor in the body, and Igor, the monster speaking in Igor's voice, and it's like, all right, who are we watching here now, kind of thing. But it's funny. I know a number of people who love the film, and that's the thing they love about it the best. They said, "Oh, it's so effective at the end when, it turns out that's Igor in the monster's body. It's like this madman, driving this truck, or something at this point." So it's a lot of it is personal taste. But if you ask me, I would say that he doesn't quite nail it in this film. He has some very things going for him, but it doesn't quite nail it. Yeah.
Visually, there are some interesting moments. There's the scene in the courtroom where you've got the monster seated there.
Mhm.
That's kind of a powerful image to look at. And then another scene where he breaks his chains, he lifts them over his head in defiance. I can still
Yes.
see those, as if I just saw them yesterday. Those they last with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it really is, and, Hardwick goes up to him, and he, like, recognizes him as, a member of the Frankenstein family, and, yeah, stands up and lifts those chains over his head and stands there like that, and then, again, this is like a wild, mad beast there trying to break his restraints, and, it is. That kind of thing works extremely Cheney manages very, very well. And he pulls that really pulls that off. And I think that is one of the things that really makes the film work is that you feel the whole time that you're watching it that you really do have this out of control being who, if he decides to, it's funny. Ralph Bellamy says early in the film, he says, if he gets loose, he can break down the building. And, Strategic Hardwick says, "It's a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it?" And he says, No, he's huge. He's a monster. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. So it's establishes performance, establishes the other actors' dialogue, in the plot, uh, all those things. Um, Again, part of the problem I would say with Cheney's performance is that, uh, he's surrounded by such great actors. He's for example, Lugosi as Igor is just terrific. Probably the best thing that Lugosi ever did.
Oh yeah.
So he's got to sort of share the screen with Lugosi in that role, and it's just impossible almost to share the screen with Lugosi in that role. He's just brilliant. He has a few little, not as many, but a few periods of time with Lionel Atwill, who is always the
Mhm.
mad doctor, and in this case is a very, very, very mad doctor, and has to work with his presence. So Cedric Hardwick is a kind of a low key British knighted actor, but again he has this sort of suave royal aura about him, so that when he walks on screen, it's like boy, who is this dude? He's really
Mm.
he's good. He wonder if he is related to royalty in England or something, because he's got this incredible savoir-faire and this incredible style. He's got all this, and of course, he's working with somebody he wasn't really fond of. He's working with Evelyn Ankers, who
Mhm.
I think she was more beautiful in this film than any of the others she made. She would really look good in this film. She really looked lovely, and of course, it gives one of her magnificent screams at that one point. And, when she screams, she pretty much owns the screen. The scream owns the screen. So, so so they've got some good moments too. So he's got a lot of people to have to play off of there, who are acting their heads off, and he's basically playing and being directed to all right, stand very still, be very stolid, look threatening,
Mm.
don't do too much, okay? Uh, which is always an actor's joke. They say, many actors have worked with directors, and they said, they used to laugh and say, I worked with, for example, William Wyler, and they would say, what would you say? And he would say, uh, he gave me a very good piece of direction. He said, don't do anything. All right. So, yeah, I mean, an actor doesn't want to hear that, right? And they want to do something, but
No.
sometimes that is the most effective screen acting. Is just don't do anything. Don't distract from the other actors. Don't let the audience kind of read what's in your mind. Don't do anything that's going to distract or get in the way. Totally different kind of thing in stage acting. So at any rate, so Cheney's he's got a whole flock of great actors surrounding him in the movie, and he's got to try to hold his own with all these folk.
I want to get to Lugosi in a moment because he's very interesting as well for many reasons. But one more question on Cheney. We've heard reports that he was very difficult on the set, reportedly drank heavily. He did not get along with the makeup man, Jack Pierce, who had a difficult personality. What does your research tell you, Greg, about Lon Chaney? Was he that difficult on the set?
Well, once again, it's like so many things with this film and with Cheney. You have to you have to look at it from two different points of view. Um, he was difficult during the Wolfman with Pierce. Once again, the Karloff equation gets into it. Because Pierce had been working, for example, whenever he made a Frankenstein monster, he worked with Karloff. Karloff was like a saint. All right, Karloff would sit there in a chair and he would never complain, and he would just tell every once in a while, but tell a joke or something of that nature, and absolutely was a complete stoic, and the dear Boris nickname and that sort of thing, and he was so Pierce was used to working with someone like Karloff. At one point, I remember, like in the '60s, Pierce was on a television show, and he was talking about having worked with Karloff, and he said, we never had any problem. The man is just so wonderful, and it almost sounded like he was going to cry. The man is just so wonderful. Well, Chaney, of course, was when he did the Wolfman with Pierce. That's a really nasty makeup. All that fur and all the mess and all the glue and all the yak hair and the teeth and all this sort of thing. And of course, as Chaney said, in addition to having it put on, at the end of the day, you had to have it all peeled off and all this. And I'm sure that, once in a while he would say to Pierce, yeah, it's SOB, or, well, can't you be a little more gentle? And Pierce would say, yeah, shut up, Don. Let me do my job, kind of thing. And they would go back and forth at each other. But show you where Chaney was coming from. This would happen very late in The Ghost of Frankenstein, but it kind of really set the stage up for what happened later with Chaney at Universal and the way he had to deal with things. And that is that in the beginning of The Ghost of Frankenstein, you have the wonderful scene where they blow up the castle, old Castle Frankenstein, and Lugosi's Igor comes up, and you see Chaney's hand, the monster's hand, kind of jut out of the sulfur pit, all right, where he's been imprisoned for all this time. And, Lugosi helps him out, and he comes clambering out, and he's all covered with muck and with sulfur and with all his gook and everything, and so on. When they shot that scene, this was a Universal trick. They saved it for the very last day of shooting. It happens very early in the film from a continuity wise, but they actually, from the point of view of shooting the film, they saved it for the last day. Again, this was a Universal trick. This is like what happened on The Mummy when they had Zita Johann, and the last thing that she was supposed to do in a reincarnation scene that ended up being cut was that she was going to be thrown into a lion's pit. And they actually built a lion's pit on the back lot at Universal. And the director, Carl Freund, on his last day, said, all right, Zita, get in there with the lions. And of course, he figured that if the lions overacted and, took a bite out of her, he had the rest of the film finished, right? I mean, he didn't have to worry about replacing her because that was the end of the movie. Well, they did the same thing with Chaney to an extent. All right. What they did is they took him. First, he got there at some ungodly hour, before dawn. They made him up as the monster, which of course in itself was like a 4-hour job. Then they took him to the set and they sealed him into this sulfur thing, this big sulfur wall, all right, that he had to sit in behind it. Piled up the rocks, the sulfur rocks, all this stuff in front of him. Had a little hole in it. He stuck a straw through the hole into his mouth so that he could, breathe. Meanwhile, he couldn't see, right? He sat back there in total darkness in this sulfur wall, all this heavy makeup, and breathing in, all right, this through the straw. And he can't make a sound. If he says anything, they say, all right, we got to start all over again, right? And there he is trapped in there like that. And he's basically buried alive. I mean, he really is basically buried alive. Again, this was the last day. They had a scene where, Lugosi kind of moves a lightweight rock, obviously, gets him out, and you see the monster kind of come stumbling out. Now, he had a breakdown. he had a breakdown back there in that mess, and he didn't really know who he was. He didn't know what he was doing. He was completely lost. His wife got hold of him, got him. They got the makeup off of him. She took him home. She said, "We're getting out of Hollywood. We're going someplace else." They went and picked up a couple of his relatives. They put him in a car. They drove down to the border, just so the studio couldn't come after him and say, "Oh, by the way, we noticed we want to do a retake on this." There's, something like that. So she basically, kidnapped him and got him down there. And so after several days, the man, God bless him, finally came out of this horrible funk he was in, right? And recovered. Now, of course, when he recovered, it gradually came back to him, right? What had happened and being in the wall and having a straw in his mouth and not being able to see and all these things. So when he reported for another horror film, which I think was The Monk's Tomb, he was ready to, he was, he was a bear. He was like, "All right, we're not having this nonsense anymore. You better, by God, not, do any of this kind of crazy stuff." And, but it really, really traumatized him for life. Years later, he was making a movie, and with a bunch of kids, and I believe they were in Texas, and he said, that it was around this area where he had been part of this escape attempt from the studio, and he said, he had just he never really got over it. He just couldn't. So yeah, he could be very extroverted. He could be very aggressive, and everything. But the studio could be absolutely, by God, sadistic. All right.
Yeah.
How they handled their actors. And they did with him. And he just reached the point that he said, I'm not going through this anymore. He of course obviously did. He did other horror roles where he did the makeup, but he made sure nobody sealed him in a sulfur box or a sulfur cave or anything of that nature again, or made it so we couldn't see, made it so we could hardly breathe. I mean, you think about that. I couldn't do it. If somebody said to me, "We're going to put you in here, and this is going to be like a 7-hour job," but it's the end of the movie. Tomorrow you can sleep in, and
right.
No, couldn't do it.
Yeah, this is really cruel and unusual treatment. If they pull this in Hollywood today, somebody would get charged with a crime.
Absolutely. And it could have killed him. In addition to the sadistic treatment, he could have suffocated and nobody would have known it, in there. Because because again, he wasn't going to make any sounds, or make any movements. So, they could have, at the end of the day, pulled the wall down, and there he'd be, having gone off to meet the angels. So, it's a shame. So, yeah, he suffered. He really did suffer.
Yeah.
For his.
No, that puts things in context. You have a different appreciation for what the actor went through. Let's talk a little bit more about Lugosi. He is, as you say, terrific as Igor, as he was in the previous movie, Son of Frankenstein. He's great in both of the films. Maybe a little bit better in Son of, but still outstanding in the Ghost of Frankenstein. Did he want to be the monster? Was he resentful of the fact that he didn't have that chance? Do we know anything about his mindset going into this?
As far as Lugosi going into the Ghost of Frankenstein?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he want to be the monster?
I don't think he ever really wanted to be the monster. I think that he felt that,
okay.
I think he always had this idea in his head that the role didn't really offer anything. And I think that maybe when he finally saw it, it's interesting. He talked. Somebody asked him one point, an actress I knew in England whose family was related to Lugosi, and she said that at one point somebody in her family asked him, "Did you ever see the movie Frankenstein? Did he ever go see it?" Because they knew that he hadn't wanted to do it, and they said, "Did you, after it came out, did you see it?" And he said he did, and he said it really upset me. And he said the thing that really upset me about it was the last scene with the monster in the windmill burning. And he said that's upset me because it reminded me of when I was in the war, in the Great War.
Hmm.
And he said I saw men burning, to death. I saw, uh, all these terrible things happening, people suffering and screaming for their mothers, and all this, the monster doesn't scream for his mother, but he's certainly screaming and hysterical and all that, and trapped in that windmill. And that's what I think finally really uh, nodded Lugosi into realizing, well, this role had more to it than I thought it did. But still, he figured, these scenes, can there be like that one? And I don't think there was anything really wrong with him feeling this way. He thought, that's not my kind of role. That's
Hmm.
it's like asking me to play a gorilla or something. It's just not what I'm cut out for. I'm cut out for other different, more colorful, more subtle kind of roles, and certainly nothing that that big and lumbering and all that. So I
Hmm.
think when we went into Ghost of Frankenstein, I think it's a very good question about thinking that maybe when he did Son of Frankenstein and was going into Ghost of Frankenstein, that he might have thought, well, maybe in this they'll actually cast me as the monster. Uh, I think he was much more excited about playing Igor, again, than he would have been about
Yeah.
doing monster. Yeah, and he just loved the role of Igor, and so he couldn't wait to get back into that broken neck and the beard and the all that all that
Hmm. Yeah.
makeup.
Oh, yeah. You've mentioned some of the other cast members, very top-notch people: Lionel Atwill, Evelyn Ankers, Ralph Bellamy. You have a young actress, very young Janet Ann Gallo. I'm
Yes,
curious if you got a chance to interview some of the actors who lived to later ages, specifically Ankers, Bellamy, or Gallo. You ever talk to any of them?
I talked to Gallo,
Hmm.
and it was very interesting. I went out to Los Angeles at one point on a research trip, and the fellow I was staying with said, "Have you ever?" And he said the same question you did. He said, "Did you ever interview Janet A. Gallo?" And I said, "No, I didn't know where she is or anything else." He said, "Yeah." He said she lives about 20 minutes from here, uh, the Simi Valley, I believe. And he said, "Let me call her up and say, I have a fan here. I'd like to come over and see her." And she was great. And so I went over to see her, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because she absolutely adored Lon Chaney. She loved him,
Hmm.
absolutely loved him, and he was wonderful to her. And he was sweet to her. He was gentle to her. He'd have her watch him while they put the makeup on him so that she wouldn't be scared. Um,
Wow.
he'd ride her put her on his leg and ride her up and down. He'd even have her to his house on weekends, where he could spoil her and buy her presents and treats and stuff like that. He and his wife Patsy would spoil Janet, and so they were great friends. And she said, in fact, and some years later, um, that I believe she said her mother died, and that Lon got in touch with Janet's father and said, I'll adopt her if it's too much for you to be able to bring her up at this point because of the
Hmm.
obligation you have. And of course, he didn't do that, but the father didn't do it. But oh no, she just you mentioned Lon Chaney's name, and her eyes just lit up. I mean, she thought he was
Hmm.
just a wonderful man, and he was terrific to her. Yeah, she just loved him. As
That's
far
great to hear.
Yeah, as for the other people you mentioned, I never got. I would have loved to have interviewed Evelyn Ankers. As it turned out, it was a funny thing. I knew her daughter. This was after uh, Evelyn had died. I knew her daughter, and at one point we were going to Hawaii, and I was talking to her daughter, and her daughter said, um, "I tell you what, if you're coming out, I can rent you my mother's old condominium uh, out in Maui." So I never met her, but I got to stay in
Hmm.
her in her condominium. But uh,
Hmm.
yeah, Evelyn didn't she and Chaney didn't care for each other and at all, and they just had it was one of those personality things that they just did not,
Yeah.
didn't groove on each other, and he apparently teased her mercilessly. I mean, he would
Yeah.
harass her, to be honest, and she she didn't care for that, and so she had a lot of there's a lot of stuff in the book about some issues that they had, and that they never broke down the wall and became buddies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was another you mentioned. Who was it? Lionel Lapp?
Final question. No, I'd mentioned Ralph Bellamy.
Oh, Ralph Bellamy. No, I never got a chance to talk to Bellamy. Bellamy was,
because he was still making films in the 1980s.
He was, and and a number of people did talk to him, and it was interesting. He always told the same story. He had a story about the Ghost of Frankenstein that he always told, and he said that one of the things was, he said that he remembered that Chaney had somebody on the set, like a gopher or a stand-in or something, that always used to bring Chaney little shots of bourbon throughout the day to help get him through the days on the set. But he also said that he had a funny story. He said that at one point that he and Sir Cedric Hardwicke were talking, and the director, L.C. Kenton, came along and said, "We're going to go back on the back lot with Evelyn Anchors, and we're going to do a shot on the Notre Dame Cathedral set, and it won't take that long. So you guys want to come down, you can do that. If you want to stay here, whatever you want to do." So he and Bellamy and Hardwicke sat there and chatted and talked and told jokes to each other and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, a couple hours went by. Finally, he went down to the set. There was the Notre Dame Cathedral. There was Evelyn Anchors up on the stairs, and the director, Earl Kenton, said, "All right, Evelyn, this is how we're going to do it. All right, it's 2:00 in the morning." Of course, it was daylight, on the set where they were outside. It's 2:00 in the morning. All right. The Wolfman just carried off your mother. Of course, there was no Wolfman in the movie, and she didn't have a mother in the movie. All right. You're stuck in this horrible, dank, oozing, ugly, terrible castle. And of course, there's the front of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which looked beautiful. And all this. And, the Frankenstein's monster is chasing you, and after you tonight, and he's going to try to catch you. And, this has been going on now for a long time. I want you to walk down those stairs, look at the camera, and I want you to give off the impression to everybody, all right, who's going to be watching this movie, that you're fed up with it all. That was it. You're just fed up with it all. So Ralph Bellamy said whenever he and Cedric Hardwicke ran into each other anywhere in the world, he said, it was a lot of places over the years that they ran into each other. He'd go up to Sir Cedric and say, "Well, Sir Cedric, are you fed up with it all?" Hardwicke would say, "Yeah, I am. How about you, Ralph? You fed up with it all? I'm fed up with it all too." Yeah. So so big became a catch line between the two of them. But it was good. Yeah, it was kind of strange. But but it was that was Ralph. But he didn't. It was funny. He had that story, but he didn't really have too much else to offer from what I understand from him.
Right.
If he said, you're in Ghost of
Greg,
Frankenstein.
final question. Yeah. Final question on this film. How do you rate the Ghost of Frankenstein? Mediocre, good, very good, something else? What's your rating of it?
I'd give it a good. I'd give it a good because I love watching it for the actors. All right. All the actors are fun to watch. I love watching it for the actors. I like the atmosphere. I like some of the special effects. I love even though as much as it upsets me now to watch it, I love the dynamiting of the castle, in which you see the monster trapped in the silver. I guess it's hard to watch now, but very impressive to see. Like I say, I think the ending is kind of ridiculous with the brain and the other body and everything, but it
Hmm.
certainly is exciting. All right, to see it. Uh, all the fire and I think that the scenes between Cheney and Janet and Gallo were lovely. I mean, they remind you of the scenes of Karloff and Little Maria, in the original Frankenstein. I think all of this, all these things work out, and it's only a 67-minute movie, I believe, and even with all
Hmm.
that, to get all that into the film, and and it's just fun, and it holds your attention. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no place in it where it just kind of where it kind of slides off and you say okay, I'm ready for another good part. It's always fun to watch.
Yeah. All right, that's Ghost of Frankenstein. We're going to take a short break. When we come back with Greg Mank, his thoughts on House of Frankenstein. Stay with us on the Ghostly Gallery podcast. Welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery podcast. We continue with the terrific writer and historian Gregory Mank. And we now move on to another Frankenstein film. This is one that Greg and Frank Dello Stritto discussed in tandem at last year's Monster Bash. And that film, House of Frankenstein, 1944. Just to give you a quick recap of the film, Boris Karloff stars as Dr. Gustav Niemann, a grave robber, deranged scientist who escapes prison when a lightning bolt strikes the prison, results in its collapse. Niemann takes on the hunchback Daniel, played by J. Carrol Naish, as his partner. The two men then end up killing the head of a traveling carnival show that features the skeleton of Dracula, which is accidentally brought back to life by Niemann. Niemann and Daniel then stumble upon the frozen bodies of the Wolfman and the Frankenstein monster. They were buried when Frankenstein's castle collapsed in the earlier film, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And Niemann will call upon the monster to take revenge against those who imprisoned him in the first place. Even though they were very justified, he didn't feel they were. All right, let's talk, Greg, about why you and Frank decided that you wanted to tackle this film. Normally, you do your own presentations on your own, and you're both terrific presenters and speakers, but you decided to do this one in tandem at Monster Bash. How come?
Well, first of all, Frank is a terrific speaker and a terrific researcher, a terrific writer, great guy. And it's funny that the way things have kind of worked out in previous years is that uh, one of us gives a talk and then it's scheduled so another one gives a talk afterwards. And we thought, it would kind of work out if we both talked on the same film and both kind of just, did this in tandem. And so we decided to do House of Frankenstein because it's a crazy movie, but boy, is it lively, right? I mean, it's got all kinds of marvelous stuff in it. And so I talked about it mainly from the point of view behind the scenes, and Frank talked about it with some marvelous insights into the characters and the plot and what was going on in the story, and what is how it what what's really there, what's really happening in this movie, plot wise, that
Yeah.
he really nailed. So yeah, so we decided that we would team up, and we had a lot of fun doing it, and we're looking forward to doing another one, in fact, together at the next Monster Bash. We're going to do the 1932 Murders in the Rue Morgue, and plan to
Oh,
have a lot of fun with that one too.
nice, nice. Now, with House of Frankenstein, it's interesting. Critics at the time, they didn't like this film at all, right? The reviews were pretty poor.
No, they hated it. They, I don't know if I've ever seen a really good review of House of Frankenstein from the time period. One of the It's funny. One of the New York newspapers, in its review, titled the review "Carnival of Monstrosity," which he says actually it kind of nails it. That's pretty much what it is. The movie's sort of a carnival, and it's all monsters. Carnival of monstrosity, and so everybody thought that it was an insult to people's intelligence. The characters were all played out already. There was nothing left there. That there were all these really fine actors in the film who were all pretty much slumming, by appearing in a Universal Monster Rally, as they would have called it. It got panned. Now, from the point of view of box office, it did great. Certainly at the big horror theaters. For example, at the Rialto in New York City, it was the Christmas show. All right, 1944. nothing says Christmas like House of Frankenstein, and it was a Christmas show, and it broke the record. It was like the house record in the 40s for horror films. It certainly is a fun movie, a wild movie, crazy movie. At the end, very depressing movie. Almost everybody dies. I mean, there's hardly anybody left alive of the principals left in the film. But it is really it's really a crazy picture, and it's interesting that we talked about in Ghost of Frankenstein about the fact that Karloff did not do the monster. Couldn't have done the monster in the Ghost of Frankenstein because he was involved in arsenic and old lace. In House of Frankenstein, he had finally finished Arsenic and Old Lace, 3 years in the play, and he came back to Hollywood and wanted nice offers to get back in the movies, and he ended up at Universal doing House of Frankenstein. So he was a little miffed about the whole thing. He later called the movie a monster clam bake. So he was none too thrilled about doing this picture, but he was a professional, and I think that's kind of the key to this movie is that you've got all these different actors in it who are have these great star roles, these great horror roles, these legendary monster roles, and none of them wanted to be in it. None of them wanted. They all wanted to be someplace else. All right, they all wish they had never come near it. But again, they were pros, and so they gave it everything they had, and made it work. And but they all had their hearts professionally someplace else, where they wanted to be, what they wanted to be doing, and they all had reason in their minds to kind of wish that things were different for them professionally. Example. Lon Chaney, all right, of course, is in the film as the Wolfman. We got 5 monsters in that film, right? Of course, we got Frankenstein's monster. We've got the Wolfman. We've got Dracula. We've got the Hunchback. We've got the Mad Doctor. All right, so we've got Chaney, and Chaney is the Wolfman. That's all he is. However, when Universal first came to him and said, "Okay, Lon, we're going to make this monster rally, and we want you in it. We want you to play 3 roles." All right. We want you to play the Wolfman, of course. We want you to play Dracula because you played the son of Dracula. All right. So you're at least a member of the Dracula family. All right. And we want you to play the Frankenstein monster because you played him in the Ghost of Frankenstein. So basically, this is your movie. All right. I mean, you're going to have all these horror characters to play, and Karloff will basically, bring you back to life and then set you loose, and you'll romp and play and have a great time. Well, they changed their minds. All right. And so he ended up playing just the Wolfman. So Chaney was not happy. All right. He felt like he had been sold a bill of goods. Here he was supposed to get this great showcase film, which he played 3 roles, and he only got the 1. All right. Of course, he was happy to play the Wolfman, but it'd been nice if he had been really able to say, "Hey, watch this. You like the Wolfman? Why don't watch me play the monster? You like that? Watch me play Dracula," and so on from there. So he was not happy. John Carradine, who played Dracula, was at a very interesting time in his life. He had wanted this movie was shot in April and May of 1944. All right. He had a Shakespearean company in California stage company. And his dream in life was to be on Broadway for what would have been Shakespeare's 380th birthday. And he was going to take his repertoire, put him on there. And for a lot of reasons we won't go into, he didn't, it didn't happen. All right. So instead of, playing Hamlet on Broadway in tribute to Shakespeare on Shakespeare's birthday, all right, he's playing Dracula. All right. So he's not too thrilled about, of course, things have taken. All right. J. Carrol Naish had just been nominated for an Oscar for the movie Sahara, and the Oscar ceremonies had been about a month before that. And he didn't win. So he's not too happy, or he's disappointed. It's funny, even Elena Verdugo, who plays the Gypsy Girl, all right, plays Alonka, the Gypsy Girl. Elena Verdugo at the time turned 19 while she was making the movie, so she's pretty young to be a disappointed, jaded actress, right? Nevertheless, she's unhappy, even though she's got a great role in this movie. I mean, she falls in love with the Wolf Man, and she shoots him, and he kills her, and it's great. She was unhappy doing it. She said, because she had just auditioned for a film for DeMille and didn't get it. And so she was all distraught about not getting in this DeMille picture. And so here she was. And I said, I remember asking her, I said, so, when your agent came along and said, you're going to do House of Frankenstein and you're going to have basically the female lead and you have such a flamboyant part, were you excited? She said, I don't think I was so thrilled at all. I wasn't. She said, I thought at the time, says this is one of those movies where people go to it and the audience sits there when it comes on, everybody goes, woo, makes fun of the movie, and it's, so she was happy. So nobody was really happy, except there one exception. That was the actor playing the monster. That was Glenn Strange. And Glenn Strange was a cowboy heavy. And they didn't have anybody left to play the monster. Lugosi had played the monster. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. But they're pretty much out of horror stars to play it. And Karloff didn't want to do it. And at this point, he preferred to play the Mad Doctor. And so there they are. And it's Glenn Strange comes along and he says, "Sure, I'll do it." And of course, he's perfect. He's like 6'4", and he's again, big bruiser. He he wears the big boots, but he doesn't really need them. He puts his boots on. It's like looking up at the sky. So he's having a good time. He enjoyed it. He thought it was an honor to follow Karloff in this role, and Karloff worked with him on it. The kind of moves to make and everything. So he had fun, but everybody else on that movie is depressed. Maybe depressed is the wrong word. They're disappointed. All right, but they'd much rather be doing something else. Carradine would rather be Hamlet. Channing would rather be playing 3 roles. Naish would rather have an Oscar at home. Lena Verdugo would rather be working for Cecil B. DeMille. It just goes right down the line.
That's interesting. It doesn't really show in the movie because I think the performances are pretty darn good. Let's start with Karloff as Dr. Niemann. I thought he was great. Villainous. I mean, he's the worst monster of all, even though he's a human. What did you think of him here?
Oh, I think he's great too. I think he's probably the greatest Mad Doctor in movies. I mean, he has such presence, such flamboyance. He's so mean. He's so nasty. He's like a devil. It's funny, they have that thing in the beginning of the film where George Zucco is in it. Lionel Atwill is in it. They have 2 small roles. But at one point, George Zucco is talking about the fact that the Karloff character, had gone to jail, gone into a asylum for the criminally insane, because he had transplanted the brain of a dog into the head of a man. All right. Or wait a minute, I think I have that backwards. He transplanted the head of a man into the skull of a dog. Anyway, one or the other. Maybe he did both. But but it was something to do with a dog and a brain. And so, I mean, he was that crazy in the movie that before it even started, he was doing this kind of stuff. And then he gets loose and he goes brain crazy. He's going to put this character's brain here and this character's brain there and this character and this, and dog was going to get the monster's brain and all this kind of thing. And he is one nasty dude in that film. And you mentioned about the professionalism of him, and that's of course one of the great famous stories about House of Frankenstein is that at the end of the movie, the last thing you see is the Frankenstein monster, Glenn Strange, out on the back lot, all these torch-bearing villagers chasing him down there, and there is the monster, and he's holding Karloff, holding the Dr. Niemann. And and in the long shot, it's obviously a double for Karloff. All right, they want to get away with a double. But when they have to go in for a close shot, all right, there's a close shot of Glenn Strange in this goo, this quicksand, this muck that they have back in the back lot that night. And there's a close up of Karloff. And Karloff, takes a deep breath and goes under. All right. And the camera stays on the quicksand for a moment. And then, comes up. Apparently what happened was Karloff didn't come up when they shot the scene. He did not come up out from underneath the quicksand. Glenn Strange did. Glenn Strange came up and kind of like looked around like, hey, where'd Karloff go? Where's he supposed to be here? And the, the director, Earl C. Ketton, again, the producer, Paul Malvern, they said, oh my God, send somebody in, jump in there and pull him out. And all of a sudden, Karloff's head came popping up out of the quicksand. And, he's all covered with this mud and slime and everything. And they pulled him out and they said, Boris, why didn't you come up? And he said, oh, I didn't want to ruin the shot by coming up too early. So I stayed down. They said, you could have drowned down there. Well, I had to get a good shot. So, he probably drowned himself. It almost really makes you scratch your head. You think,
yeah,
that's professionalism, almost too far. Yeah. But you're right. Karloff is great fun to watch in this. And he's like they used to say Lionel Atwill was the maddest doctor of them all, and he's certainly right up there. But as far as an individual performance, the mad doctor, Karloff really takes the prize in House of Frankenstein.
Obviously, we talk a lot about Karloff, Chaney, even John Carradine gets a lot of love as one of the great horror actors of all time. But a guy who doesn't get talked about is J. Carrol Naish. He plays Daniel, the hunchback. I think he's quite good in this film. He wears that ridiculous organ grinder's outfit, but he still brings some respectability to the film. At times, he's a very sympathetic, caring guy. And then at other times, he's a murderous freak. I thought he was outstanding.
He is. And I think that he was a big asset to the movie in two ways. First of all, it's exactly what you say. He was great in the film. And very heartbreaking, really. I mean, his love for the gypsy girl, and that he's so heartbroken at the end when she doesn't want him, and this sort of thing. But yeah, he's very good in that, and also he fit because he was an actor who everybody respected. If you went to a movie and J. Carrol Naish came on in those days, 1944, 1945, you automatically thought, oh, wow, we got a great actor in this film. Naish is always great. He's a terrific character actor. And so this is a big point in any film's favor that he's there. So when this film comes on and they have, they show the cast and then they say, a special billing, they say, and J. Carrol Naish is Daniel, for any of the people who may have been sitting there disrespectfully when the film started, and they say, "Oh, and J. Carrol Naish, gee, well, those people film because he's in it," So yeah, and I remember seeing the first time I ever saw the film, and I remember thinking the next day, I thought, I feel so sorry for that guy. Well, he really, he was so pitiful, and he felt so sorry for him, and he was a terrific actor. And some of the mainstream films in which he was in, Beau Geste and Blood and Sand and films like that, he was terrific.
Yeah.
Really.
I want to get your opinion on John Carradine, whom I happen to like. I first saw him in The Munsters when he played Herman's boss at the funeral home. Mr. Gateman, memorable character that he played, and of course he had so many roles. He made a lot of junky movies, especially in the '60s and '70s, but he was in a lot of terrific films as well. Here he has a very interesting look as cadaverous, almost skeleton-like Dracula, but then he's not in the movie very long. They end up killing him off so quickly. I was kind of disappointed about that. What'd you think of it?
Well, I think that was sort of a hangover from the idea of using Cheney in 3 different roles. I think they felt if they were going to get away with using Cheney in 3 different roles, they had to kind of make the movie episodic and, get certain characters in, certain characters out. So I think that Dracula might have been a victim of that early approach. But I am too. I am a big fan of Carradine in many things he's done. And I think that he's a really effective Dracula. I think that he plays with a lot of, it may sound silly, but he plays with a lot of sex appeal. I mean, Lugosi did too, but in the scenes he has with Anne Gwynn, where he's kind of seducing her and that he's very close to her face and kind of whispering his lines to her and that sort of thing, are very good. And I think that I really like his look. I like the cape. I like the hat cocked at the angle. I like he kind of comes off as funny. It's another touch of of what we were talking about the sort of a carnival aspect of it. He almost seems like a magician, in the film.
Yes.
Some kind of, but almost like a magician who's a sexual predator who also thinks he's a vampire, or somebody really messed up, but but he carries it off with real suave, debonair diabolics, and he's fun to watch. And I do too. I wish he had been in the movie longer and had a lot more to do, because he really does. He's I think he's super cool.
Of course, we would get him later in House of Dracula, but not so much in this one. For me, Greg, this film is entertaining and it has its moments, but it could have been so much more. You've got the 3 main monsters, you've got this murderous hunchback, this horrible scientist. They had material that could have gone well beyond the 70-minute runtime for the film, but they didn't do that. Why do you think they missed the opportunity?
It's interesting. If you look at the production records on the movie, it cost a lot, and I'm really not sure why. I mean, part of it would have been that they had Karloff, but I mean, he didn't cost that much. But it's like, I think compared to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, I think House of Frankenstein cost about over $100,000 more to produce. And I think that there was always the idea in the studio's head, as I'm sure it is now, the studios, is that they want to make a movie at a certain particular price that they can be guaranteed themselves that they're going to make X amount of money. All right. Make the movie. If they make the movie for $350,000, they can be pretty much guaranteed that with its core audience and that sort of thing, that they'll make a profit of at least $150,000. And so I think that probably in that film, that I agree, it would have been great if it had been a 90-minute movie, as opposed to, I think, 70, as you said. But it just, I think they were being careful and trying to make sure that this was going to be a big money maker, which it turned out to be. It wasn't anywhere like in the area of Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein, but it was as a sort of a high class B picture, which is what it would have been considered at that point. It was very, very successful, and that's what Universal was going for at that point. They wanted to make some money, a lot of money, and they were and which is it was the war and World War II, so then all the studios were making big money because everybody was going to the movies, but it's fun to think about, isn't it? It's a 90-minute frame and what else they could have gotten in there.
Well, it had everything except Abbott and Costello. You could have thrown them into the mix and made it a 2-hour affair, I guess.
You sure could. Yeah, just some of those routines alone filled it out.
Yeah. Well, great stuff, Greg. We really appreciate your time. You mentioned earlier that you're going to be at Monster Bash coming up in June in Mars, PA, and you and Frank will be talking about murders in the Rue Morgue. I'm really hoping I can get out for this year's event, so that'll be coming up. Any book projects you're working on now?
I am. I've actually done 3 novels, and I'm working on a 3rd novel now. They're all related to Hollywood history, and this one's a little bit of a secret, but when it'll come out, I'll say it's related to horror, naturally, a vintage horror film. And I'm doing that, and I'm working on a new anthology on different horror films, and working on it never stops. It's very surprising. I think I saw my first horror film when I was 7 years old, and if somebody would have told me that, that when I'm at the age I am now, I was still interested in this thing, and also still playing around with it, I would have probably, even as a little kid, probably would have roared with laughter. But it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun and very enjoyable, and very always always a kick to talk to people like yourself who are really into this as well, and share ideas and talk about what we like and what we don't like with these films and all that kind of good stuff.
Well, we as fans certainly benefit from you sticking with this through all the years. It's great stuff. The book that you did, by the way, last year, Scripts from the Crypt, The Ghost of Frankenstein, is available at Amazon. It's one of several Rondo Award nominations, nominated for Best Book of the Year. Hope that you win several awards, but even if you don't, just getting nominated for a Rondo is quite an honor in and of itself. Our thanks to Greg Mank. Really appreciate it, Greg.
Bruce, always enjoyable to talk to you, and I look forward to doing it again, hopefully very soon.
Sounds good. Gregory Mank has been our guest over this past hour. We thank Greg. We thank my producer and co-host, Tracy Asteria, all of our listeners as well. We thank you for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre, and hope we'll see you next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.